Wa alaikum salam. Oh man, I'm over here. That's my AirPod. I don't want to forget it. Oh, nah, it's all good. Alhamdulillah. Appreciate it. Jazakum. MashaAllah. MashaAllah.
Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to our first Tazkiyyah Friday for the full-time seminary. Typically Fridays we have our quizzes in the morning, and we wanted to finish off Friday because it is a special day of the week. It is our mini Eid with a class that is less intense than the Arabic and the Aqidah studies. We wanted to do something that was more of a heart softener, that would be a purification of our hearts and souls. So every Friday, inshallah, we will have some amazing local scholars from our community come out, and they'll be teaching topics that are purifying to our soul, inshallah. For our first Tazkiyah Friday, we have Sheikh Isa Parada. Sheikh Isa is a graduate of the International Islamic University of Medina, and he has been serving here in the Houston Muslim community for decades. I'd like to say
Yeah.
I was a young child when I was first attending his lectures, and he has been an amazing mentor for me and for many other students of knowledge in the community. He makes himself so very available for all of us when students have questions and we don't have answers. We often go to Sheikh Isa and he can help us navigate some of those difficult questions. So alhamdulillah, we have a village as well of our own shuyukh and scholars and mentors who are helping us send the information to the next set of students. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh Isa is also the I say religious director of Islam in Spanish, which Centro Islamico, which is an amazing institute everyone should definitely check out. And they're opening up their doors very soon again.
Yeah, we finally got our permit 2 days ago. So. Alhamdulillah.
They do amazing work for a new conference here in the Houston community. They've got Dallas, Chicago, and other different chapters around the country. And as you guys may or may not know, the Latino community is the fastest growing Muslim convert community in the U.S. and they are serving that demographic along with so many other demographics. Lots of new converts come to Centro Islamico to find their community and find their village. So we're very honored to have Sheikh Isa with us today. Sheikh Isa.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings and mercy of Allah be upon all of you today. Uh, SubhanAllah, when thinking about this topic of purifying one's intention, uh, it's something that uh, no matter how long you study this Deen of Al-Islam, it's always going to be brought up. You're going to constantly hear it, read it in the Quran, read it in the Ahadith of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. For example, when we start to memorize the Quran, for the majority of us, we start with Juz Am, right? And one of the first surahs that we even hear the name, the title, right? Surah Al-Ikhlaas. In Surah Al-Bayyinah, it talks about being mukhlis. When you look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the collection of hadith, you'll see the first hadith that's mentioned is the hadith of purifying your intention. So this is something that you'll constantly read, recite, memorize, and also hear from your teachers. I recall no matter what subject matter we were learning, either at the university or with our teachers at a masjid or one of the local masjids in our neighborhood, when beginning a subject matter, they would start off with purifying your intention. No matter if we were going to start studying about the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, or we were going to talk about the caliphate, the Abbasid caliphate, they would start off with the intention being purified. And part of the struggle is that it's always going to be a lifelong journey. Many of the scholars mentioned in the past that one of the most trying or most difficult things that they had to do throughout their journey of life is the purification of their intention. So when you hear the people of the past speak about purifying one's intention, it's a lifelong journey. That's something that you hope that you start to focus on as you started this journey of trying to get closer to Allah, inshallah, by studying this deen. So if you know it's a lifelong journey, every time you hear someone reminding you of it, let us be careful and check ourselves and make sure that we're not looking at the this person speaking or saying this information as I've heard it before. We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, right? In Surah Dhariyat, the 51st chapter, verse number 55. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, right, to be reminded, remind people. For verily the reminder is a benefit to the believer. So Iman, right, faith is connected to being reminded because the way that we were created, right, we were created weak. We were created to forget. And as we know, when Shaitan was observing us before the spirit was born into our father Adam, peace be upon him, Shaitan was trying to see where was he going to attack our father, i.e., all of us. In the hadith of Sahih Muslim, he saw that Adam and all of mankind were what? Shallow. He saw in between the chest and the stomach, the solar plex area. He looked, he said, I'm going to attack him from there. He knows how we are. So we are people who forget. We are people who are in need of course, being reminded. And human beings tend to be shallow. And a lot of the great scholars of the past spoke about one of the trials and challenges of purifying one's intention is that it doesn't satisfy the nafs. It doesn't satisfy you, meaning your desires. Now think about that. When we drink, when we eat, right, we're satisfying ourselves. Even when human connection, right, we're connecting with our spouse, our children, loving each other, there's a connection there. Our nafs doesn't always have to be looked at as something negative. But there's some satisfaction there. But when it comes to the purification of our niyyah, of our intention, to do it for the sake of Allah, the nafs is like, where's the satisfaction? It's not granting me more attention. It's not granting me more love. It's not just, other desires that we have. It's not. So it goes against sometimes the way that we've all been created. So if we know this is a lifelong journey, and we know that doing this is not always satisfying to oneself, then the focus has to be constantly be disciplined in the way that we approach things. And something that I hope all who are listening are reminded of this, inshallah. When a person is going on this journey, brothers and sisters, as one brother reminded me when I remember was sitting in Medina, and myself and a few other brothers, we were just sitting, we were talking, and he said, "Don't think you're here because you're the best of people. No, we are the ones who need the most help." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting us in this path for a reason. And one of the reasons is that, as much as I'm sure many of you want to give back to the community, which is a noble thing, want to benefit your family, want to benefit others. We can go into that in a little bit later. But one of the first things that we hope that we don't forget is that we need this more than anything else. This is very key in our journey. So, does anybody know who are the first three people or categories of people that are going to be judged on the day of judgment? Or of the first? At least one of them. One of them is the scholar. So a hadith of Sahih Muslim, which is very long, hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic narration, of course, in Sahih Muslim, that was narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, where the Prophet ﷺ said on the day of judgment, the first to be judged will be a man who died as a shaheed. He'll be brought forward. Allah will remind him of the favors that were bestowed upon him, and the man will acknowledge them. Then he will ask him, "What did you express gratitude for?" The man will reply, "I fought for you until I was shaheed." Allah will say, "Kadhabt, you have lied. You fought so that people can say that you were jariyun, that you were courageous. And they have said it." So this is what was said about him. Then the command will be issued about that individual, and that person will be dragged on his face and thrown into the fire. Next, the man who acquired knowledge and read the Quran will be brought forward, and the same thing will happen to him. "Why did you do this?" And he will say, "I acquired knowledge and taught it." And Allah again will say to that man, "Kadhabt, you have lied. You just wanted people to say, Huwa alimun, he is a scholar. And also, Huwa qari'un, he is one who is the reciter of the Quran." And that was what's said about him. To the end, right? Also dragged into the fire. And the third person is someone who was a wealthy individual who would give for the sake of Allah. And Allah will ask him why he did it. And he said he spent liberally for your sake. And Allah will say, "You have lied. You said this only to be called Jawad. So you were called, so people can call you generous." And that's what it was said about you. And that person will be dragged in the fire on his face. So here, brothers and sisters, Allahu musta'an, of the first people that will be judged will be the person who, when we look at them and we hear about them, we know the status of a person who dies as a martyr, as a high standard, and a person who is looked at with respect. Of course, we know the one who's a qadi and a scholar. person who gives generously. These people are the ones who are respected in the community. But with all of that, it will bring them no benefit just because their intention was to do it for other than Allah. When someone dies a martyr, people know that they're going to be spoken about after their death, that their families are going to be honored. So it's not being done to establish freedom or establish justice in the land. It becomes a self-centered matter. Now, going on the matter of the one who's a scholar or the one who's reading the Quran, this is why we always, if you guys decide to teach consistently, one must take a day out of the week, a couple of days out of the month, almost like a mini sabbatical. Not to just take a vacation, but to really check oneself. Because you're constantly going to be told, mashallah, you're so this and so that. Constantly having people telling you that you're doing great work. People patting you on the back. People telling you you're better than me. And we could go down the line of how we see our teachers treated in the community. So you could only imagine the fitna that they have to deal with. It might look nice when you see 50, 60 people following Imam so-and-so or Sheikh so-and-so. Say, wow, amazing person. But one doesn't really think about what that person is going through. Same thing goes with people who have hufaz, who have memorized the Quran early on in their life. And maybe they are from another culture or race that you don't find that happening all the time. For the South Asian community, for example, that's something that's very common. But you never know if he has or she has a nice voice, or they have strong memory, or the way that they teach people, it brings them attention. So we as parents are not thinking about what challenges they have to go through. We're just happy, and it's a great thing, they memorize Quran. But we're not thinking about how they're going to be, mashallah, mashallah, told there's something great all the time. How is that not going to affect us? We're human beings. As I mentioned in the beginning, what was the fear of the Salaf of the past? It was what? It was they had to constantly check it because it was always moving around. Others would say we would chop it down like a weed, and it would sprout out like something else. It'll be beautified. They were constantly having to check themselves. So in this environment of ours, where just locally you might be praised, told you're doing something great, and there's nothing wrong with being told that you're doing a good job. We should always encourage each other. But it's different in encouraging one another, making dua for one another, but then the person being told this all the time, what am I taking from it? And now added on to that, social media, where you have Instagram and TikTok, and other than that, YouTube, where you're getting more attention than ever before. So when we're going on this journey, and I appreciate, may Allah reward Suhbah here and the leadership of doing something like this. Doing something like this every week, because it's going to help you on your journey in these next 10 months. Really look at, why am I doing this? There's going to be days where you're excited, and there's going to be some days where you're like, man, I don't know. For some people, I'm not saying any one of you guys, but there's people who go through that. When you're in your 5th month and you're like, man, I'm not really picking up certain things, or why is others seeming to be moving faster than I am, or the class is moving too slow, and we're going through all of this. So these reminders of the intention being purified, of improving your character, being grateful. And other than that, it's so important for the journey of the student of knowledge, because we understand, as much as we're learning, that we're going to be questioned about everything that we learn. Everything that we learn, Allah will question us about it. So, as nice as it is when we see some of our teachers having a bunch of books, we should make dua for them. Allah make it easy for them. Have they? Let's have the Husnadan. They read everything. Now, how much of it have they, and how much of whatever I'm learning am I implementing in my life? Because it's information that is, the basis of it is from Allah and His Messenger, alayhi salatu wassalam. So knowing that, going back to the hadith, knowing that there's going to be people who are going to be basically imitators. They're going to be people who are faking it. They're not being real. Because the honor of the shaheed, the honor of the alam and qari, the honor of the jawad, there are so many ayat and hadith that speak about the great honor that Allah blesses them with, male and female. But these imitators, and may Allah Azza wa Jal protect us and our children from this, I mean, the imitators, even though from the community's perspective, that, again, mashallah, they're just wonderful people. But inside, they wanted that attention. They wanted that praise. And one thing that I remember reading early on before I was Muslim, and it was said by a non-Muslim, but to someone who inspired me by the permission of Allah to accept Islam, when Malcolm X, rahimahullah, when he was in the Nation of Islam, his mentor, Elijah Muhammad, told him to be aware of the camera, be aware of the microphones, be aware of that attention, because it is like a drug. It's intoxicating. There are some of my colleagues slash maybe a teacher or two of some of the instructors here who used to be in the entertainment business. And at times, as the Prophet ﷺ allowed us to do, alhamdulillah, we will reflect upon some of the things of Jahiliyyah, that it's not too extreme. And some of them who were entertainers, they remembered, as we were talking, they remembered the feel of the crowd being excited and you moving their emotions by what you were doing on stage. So when we are on quote unquote stage, us as educators, you can feel the crowd. You can feel the emotions of the people. You can feel them become sad or happy or crying. You can feel it. And subhanAllah, part of it is because of certain things that you and I may be saying that's moving a crowd. And that can become, again, intoxicating. Or even if I have 3 or 4 students in front of me and I'm teaching them Quran. And when, mashallah, they memorize the Quran, who are they going to praise as well? Their teacher. So how many hufad have come out from my institute or from my masjid? So this is something that many of us, especially in the West, and even our teachers who are now seeing social media spread throughout different parts of the world, are dealing with constantly. Checking their niyat and checking our intention is something that is amazing to see how people were doing it when they didn't have these type of distractions, this type of attention. Even when I remember seeing the invite, and the first thing that you see is Ikhlaas. subject matter, you're thinking to yourself, or I was thinking to myself, like, the first thing I have to do is check myself. Why would I even choose to do that subject matter? And to be honest, brothers and sisters, to be straightforward, you can teach akhlaq in the sense of bringing verses and hadith and also through your actions. You can remind people through examples about shukr and things like that. You're really not teaching someone this is how you quote unquote do ikhlas. What we're doing here, or what I hope, is that we're reminding one another. We're going through some verses or hadith or statements of the people of the past together. Because as I mentioned, that one thing that you can observe, and you'll see this through time, is when speaking to one another, with your colleagues, there are times where one either has to be advised and be reminded that, hey, have you taken time for yourself? Or you need to remind someone, have they been reflecting upon their own selves? Because you're going to get a lot of, again, yes, men and women, a lot of praise. But it's only going to be a very few of our mentors who are going to come to us. And unfortunately, as we are human beings, I've seen it where some of our mentors have tried to advise, and that person is dealing with some serious spiritual issues. We're not talking about someone who's dealing with drugs or alcohol. We're not talking about womenizing or dealing with money in an inappropriate fashion. We're talking about people who are educating the community. And you sometimes will see the reaction of, who are you to tell me that I need to check myself? Who are you? And if they're doing that with mentors, imagine if someone who comes after giving a khutbah or talk and they want to mention a point. That's when all of our learning comes to fruition at that moment. How am I going to deal with that person? Am I going to give them husna dhan, the benefit of the doubt, that their intention to advise me is coming from a good place, even if they are saying it possibly in a rough manner, or they may be wrong. There are times where someone will give a khutbah, as I've, many of us have given talks and sermons, where you're going to say something that it's not pleasing to the crowd. And you come down and someone says, brother, how can you say that this is allowed or not allowed? And then you may mention to them, well, Allah said this, the Prophet ﷺ said that, and they're still reacting to you. At that moment, do we now allow our ego get in the way and be like, hey, who are you to tell me? I mean, then I just tell you all the verses in the hadith, and you're questioning me? When and if, and may Allah again protect us from that, if we get to that point ever, then it may be that we may need to take a break from teaching or giving a sermon, or we need to take, like I said, a mini sabbatical and really sit down and check myself and ask myself, what is the reason that I'm doing this? So, to combat all of this, the first thing, as I mentioned, is that I was mentioning and been constantly saying, is taking time out to reflect upon one's own actions and intention. If we are wanting to continuously improve ourselves this way, brothers and sisters, that is something that we have to constantly do. As many of the Salaf said, you will not meet a believer except that they are evaluating themselves. Again, if we're talking about the first three generations and we know that the Prophet ﷺ said that they are the best generations that ever lived, they're speaking from a place where they had to face that firsthand on a constant basis because it was something new to the people there. Remember, they were dealing with people who were coming into Islam from the time of the Prophet ﷺ and after that, who were worshiping creation. And one of the things that happens when it comes to this thing of intention is when checking oneself, most of the times it's connected to wanting to be, riyah, wanting to be heard or seen. So people are, constantly coming to the human being. They want to be inspired by the human being, motivated by the human being. Lead me, show me, guide me. This is constant. I'm talking about human beings. They need a guru. They need a priest. They need a pastor. And then there's an understanding we need the Sheikh Imam. There was a survey that came out by ISPU. What is it? The Institute of Social. I forgot. Sorry, what it was called. The institute. It's run by Muslims, but they had done a survey comparing Christians, Jews, and Muslims when it comes to their leadership. And the Muslims had a higher percentage of going to their imam slash mashayikh for their day-to-day problems versus the Christians and the Jews. I was a bit surprised by that. Now, again, not saying that we shouldn't seek consultation. We are actually advised and ordered to do so, to take shura, to seek advice, to ask Ahl Dhikr if we don't know. But part of Ikhlaas is connected to Tawheed, that we're doing all of our actions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And part of the reason of your teachers and our teachers teaching us was not that I now walk behind my sheikh and have him be my guru for the rest of my life. A good teacher who was taught well, who followed the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, is there to guide you to a certain point and then for you to move on with your life, to be independent of human beings and dependent of Allah. That is one of the reasons you want to learn the Arabic language. It's so that when I'm reading the Arabic, it's going to be, mashallah, a different world than when you're reading it in English or in Urdu or whatever other language that you know. It is a whole, I remember one brother told me that learned the Arabic language. He said, I could not believe, and he's an older brother, that the first 30 years of my life, I was behind the imam and I didn't know what he was saying. And now I pick up 30 to 40% of what Allah is saying in the Quran. The way that he said it, I mean, it had a profound effect on me. Because here's a born Muslim speaking about being behind the imam for so long, not knowing what is being said. And Allah bless some of us who came into Islam to go. I was only 4 years in my Islam when I went to go study overseas, and started learning the Arabic language. So I can't really recall the last time that I was, hearing the Quran. And I'm not saying that you're hearing everything and you know every single word. For some people, mashallah, they do. But my point is I can't remember not listening to it and not really getting the gist or main understanding of what was being recited. We're doing this to become, again, independent from the human being, independent on Allah Azza wa Jal. Because Allah is telling us to go to the people of knowledge when we don't know. We're not supposed to do it because I need my teacher. I need my guru. I need my guide. And being real in our community, we're talking about the broader ummah, we know that there are people who are tested this way, that are scholars. Some are are not asking to be followed that way, and some unfortunately are. And this becomes an issue where, again, is this the way that I'm supposed to behave? This is why we don't only focus on the people that are teaching us. We go to the people of the past to help us see how they went through that journey, the struggle that they had to go through in order for them to be clear upon why they were doing what they were doing, meaning serving Allah Azza wa Jal. So my intention is what? My intention is to reflect upon what I do on a daily basis. Number two, that words, and I'm speaking specifically to myself and everyone here, that we're not sharing this knowledge as going back to the hadith so that people can praise us, call us ustad or ustada or any other sheikh or sheikha. We're not doing this for the title. And that we remember that Riyah will creep up upon us in a way that the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith in the Sunan of Ibn Majah, where he heard the Sahaba talking about the Masih ad-Dajjal. And the Prophet ﷺ overheard them speaking about it, and he came out. And he said, do you know what I fear more for you than the Masih ad-Dajjal? Now think about that. The Masih ad-Dajjal, which Nuh alayhi salatu salam and every prophet and messenger spoke about. It is the greatest fitna for humanity. Just on a side note, I highly advise having the intention, first and foremost, for oneself to learn about the fitna of Masih ad-Dajjal, and that we pass on this knowledge to, starting with our families, that we prepare them for those trials, no matter if it happens in 10 months, 10 years, or in 1,000 years. That we put down a legacy within our families, that they can be with the people of, or the followers of the Mahdi and Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. And if one goes deeply into the whole journey or the trial of the Masih ad-Dajjal, one will look at the fitna of the niyyah, the intention, and how intention and purifying your intention and lack thereof is interconnected to who you will be with in that time period. Anyways, I don't want to go too deep into that, but just mentioning here that the Prophet ﷺ said that what he feared most was what? Was riyah, the hidden shirk. And then he went into specifics, and we've heard this many times. It's when the person stands up and beautifies their prayer. So when we're looking at this, brothers and sisters, please, every single day, remind yourself on what is the reason that I'm taking on this journey. And never be overconfident, and always ask Allah Azza wa Jal to keep all of us humble. Ameen. Because as we see the Prophet ﷺ feared our intentions being swayed or jammed up or moved from the path that it's supposed to be on, more than the Masih ad-Dajjal. That it is a fitna that we deal with, a trial that we deal with on a daily basis. And to be very, again, straightforward, be aware that many of our teachers and colleagues are going through this trial. And many times there are not enough people telling them and reminding us of the need of checking oneself. So this is why it's so important that we remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ speaking about good companionship versus bad companionship. And it's many times geared in a way where we're thinking about, especially when we mention these hadith, usually it's high school, college students. Be aware of your friends, right? They'll affect you this way. Be around good people. But the student of knowledge is thinking, nah, I'm good because I'm surrounded by students of knowledge, or I'm surrounded by people who are learning Islam. We're not the Khawarij, people who dedicated themselves to the worship of Allah. The first group that ever broke off from the Muslims, it wasn't because of an issue of predestination or the names and attributes of Allah. How many of the companions said about them when they would see them in the way that they would worship Allah, that they couldn't compare their worship to the worship of these people? These are the companions of the Prophet. So I'm saying this about this group. But their intentions were all messed up. Their understanding of Islam was thrown off. And this is why so many of the people of the past, like Hassan al-Basri and Sufyan al-Thawri, when they speak about the purification of the intention connects to the action, and the action is based upon the Quran and the Sunnah. And that's where the Khawarij went astray. They were only quoting Quran. Again, when looking at them, it's like, wow, man, look how they worship Allah, how they recite the Quran, praying at night, fasting. They look courageous, right? Warriors, so on and so forth. And when they were arguing just on the basis of their understanding of the Quran. That's why Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, he came to them not only mentioning things from the Quran, but also from the Sunnah. So, alhamdulillah, when we're basing our journey here from these two sources, we have a way to go back to. We have a reference point. Alhamdulillah. Now it's almost as if you are setting up your own journey, taking different people's advice. And like I said, what's helped me from some of my mentors who have talked to me, and we're not talking about 20 years ago. As one of my great teachers said, you're not going to face the trials of a student of knowledge like the general person who's dealing with issues of alcohol and drugs and womanizing and all sorts of fawahish. You're going to be dealing with people just like you who are dealing with diseases of the heart, jealousy, hatred, laziness, etc., etc. So be careful how you look at yourself. This is why I was getting dropped off at the airport. So one has to observe themselves constantly and be like, man, what are my weaknesses? Where can my intention be thrown off? From what angle? Am I someone who likes to hear praise? Am I someone who likes to influence people? Am I? Be real with oneself. Let us not lie to ourselves and feel like, no, we're in a pretty good place. Because if the people of the past are showing us anything, is that they were being real with themselves. And some of the people of the past became very reclusive because of this. Some people really, and they recognized how they were. Ibn Qayyim rahimullah was one of them. One of our teachers who passed away not too long ago, he wrote a book of Hilatul Talib al-Ilm, basically lessons of the student of knowledge, Bakr Sheikh Bakr Abu Zaid, rahimahullah. He's someone who would cover himself all up in the Haram in Mecca, so people wouldn't recognize him, because he was someone who was obviously actually he was from the people who was from the council of the major scholars of Saudi Arabia, so people wouldn't recognize him and so on and so forth. As he got older, he became more reclusive because he started to understand himself that being noticed, that being praised, and all that was coming with it was becoming a fitna for him, rahimahullah. So he obviously wanted to pray in the Haram in Mecca, but he would do whatever he could to make sure that people wouldn't recognize who he was. He would literally cover his face up. He would dress with not the nicest thobe, so he just kind of wouldn't stand out, kind of like a Bedouin, look. And when some of the students would recognize or hear that he was there, you would see him running from them. He would run. He didn't want to deal with people. He didn't want the praise. There was another great scholar from Ethiopia who used to teach in the Haram in Mecca, Sheikh Muhammad Amin. I remember I was asking one of his students, how should one prepare themselves to deal with all of this attention? And his student said, that the Sheikh said, I asked Allah Azza wa Jal to allow me to benefit the Ummah and at the same time worship Allah without being seen. And when I thought about it, subhanAllah, it was just dua. He was sincere to Allah. He wanted to benefit the people. And he did, rahimahullah. He taught in the most holiest place in the world. He wrote books of hadith or collected books of hadith and worked on the chain of narration and so on and so forth. He dedicated himself and his life to the sunnah. So he benefited the ummah. But his student said that one thing about him, that he wouldn't stand out. So that when he was in the haram, he would just pray and no one would bother him. So these are certain points that you can take and reflect upon it and see where and how that may or may not fit your life and what you're going through and what you're trying to do with this knowledge that you have. And hopefully after, Jummah today, as we know, it's one of the most blessed times to make dua. This is a perfect time to ask Allah Azza wa Jal in your own way to continue to help you and your teachers and your loved ones to purify their intention and to make us of those who are constantly on that journey, and that He protects us from falling into hidden shirk, and He protects us from being followed, meaning that people are wanting to be around us and surround us. And I'll end with this, as Ibn Mas'ud said, that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't leave us at the end of the journey. He left us in the beginning. This was Ibn Mas'ud talking about the greatest guide and human being that ever lived, alayhi salatu wasalam. As much as They wanted to be with the Prophet ﷺ. He was a human being, alayhi salatu wasalam, and of course he passed away. So not only did they go, and especially Ibn Mas'ud, who became Muslim early on in the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ, who had to go through that trial of, is this man truly a messenger of Allah? And was tested that way, becomes Muslim. He's alive through all of those years in Mecca, making the hijrah, being in Medina, and then seeing the Prophet ﷺ pass away. And now he has to practice his Islam without who? His guide there. So this is what the hope is for myself and everyone here, brothers and sisters, is that we are learning to serve Allah Azza wa Jal, to be fully dependent on Him and independent from human being, and that we can be dependent on Allah by the connection with the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the connection with the Arabic language, and then, inshallah, making dua for our teachers that Allah bless them for all their time and effort that they put in on a day-to-day basis. Ameen. So with that, I don't know if anyone has any comments or any questions, or just time to just breathe for a second.
Sanka, I have a question.
Yes.
So since we're starting our journey, can you give us some advice on what our intention should be when we start every day?
The last part was, sister, I'm sorry?
I'm saying if you can give us some advice on what our intention should be, like, whenever we purify some intention as students of knowledge, what we should do for our intention every day.
I appreciate the question. I know it sounds obvious, but one way of looking at it is when we say, oh, yes, my intention should be doing this for the sake of Allah, but being more specific in the way that we are asking Allah to purify our intention on not just to serve Him alone, but how to serve Him. Like, what is our purpose? We know the general purpose is to worship Allah. But as an individual, especially like you said, a student of knowledge, what is my purpose? Some people, alhamdulillah, all they do is teach the Quran. They found their purpose. When they found it, how they found it, mashallah, you could sit down with your teacher and just ask how they went through that journey of memorizing the Quran, number one, and then choosing to teach others for, I'm saying, dedicating their life to it. And that's something that one may not find right away. There's many students of knowledge that are doctors, medical doctors, they're engineers, they're teachers, quote unquote professionals. And when speaking to some of them, for them, they found their purpose in just having a personal connection with their Lord and being able to navigate the Islamic sciences by themselves, of course, with connection with their teachers, but meaning that it was something that they felt a lot of meaning and satisfaction just by being able to find ways to get closer to Allah without having to be what people would quote unquote expect them to be, meaning the Sheikh or the Imam or the Hafidah, etc., etc. And that whatever profession that they went into, it helped them enhance their Islam through that profession, with their manners, right? With doing things with ihsan, perfecting things, doing it to the highest level, being quote unquote professional. So, taking a step back, one can, should ask themselves the question: I'm dedicating X amount of hours of my life. We're not, and it's just not, as Sister Sophia knows, and the other instructors. The 8:45 to 2 is just part of the journey. The real challenge is after 2 p.m. What are we doing with the review? Anyone can tell you who memorized any part of the Quran, and anyone who maybe mashallah has done it here. It's one thing to memorize it. It is a whole different, not like you beast, a whole different, ball game. Thank you. When it comes to the maraja, the review. That's why when I see some of my students who are hufad, I don't ask them about. I start off with, "How's your review?" When they're like, then it's like, okay, how really can someone call themselves a hafiz of the Quran and they're not reviewing? And again, if someone, mashallah, memorized it and they can dedicate themselves to it, the review as much as they used to when they maybe were younger, that's their personal journey. They accomplish something. But again, when we're talking about just Quran as an example, but reviewing knowledge, it's the out of class time. That's when you're really seeing yourself, and that's a way of checking your intention. And so that's another way, sisters, like checking your intention of after class, after either dealing with specifically this seminary, or when I'm doing other classes, how many books, well, it used to be for us, sorry, no books that we had, or information on our computers, right? How many notes do we have? When was the last time we reviewed that information? How much of it did we, again, with ihsan, my intention, if I want to be, for example, one of the reasons I want to teach, how am I preparing myself to be a better teacher? How am I organizing my notes in order so that I can teach a lesson, to the best of my ability, and always finding ways to improve? How is it that, for example, I can look at a verse or a hadith and don't be shy? Actually, we as teachers should always encourage, as we were encouraged, to look at a verse in hadith and reflect upon it yourself and see what blessings or what conclusion or whatever can you come out of it. And then you ask a person of knowledge or your teacher, "Hey, I read this hadith. Can it mean this? Can this verse mean that?" And it's always nice to see your teacher tell you, Ibn Mas'ud said something similar. And shouldn't be like, yeah, what I mean? Like I'm feeling like I'm something important, someone important, but it is nice that I reflected upon something similarly to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Or our teacher would be like, that might be a little bit too, you know, to the left, right? Or on left field somewhere. Like that's too far. Let's bring it back. So what happens is that when looking at certain verses, for example, the verse in Surah Al-Furqan, the dua that we all, inshallah, if we haven't memorized the verse, at least we've heard the dua, right? وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا, right? When looking at that verse and that dua, we're asking Allah Azza wa Jal, or Allah's telling us from those people, they make the dua, right? Asking Allah to give them the gift of a good spouse and offspring. Basically, we're seeking serenity at home. What we're encouraged to do is look at that verse and think about, how am I going to obtain that? So when one starts to reflect upon it, one can go then backwards. Where did this series of verses start? Has anyone memorized Surah Furqan? No. Right? So it starts off with the characteristics of Ibadur Rahman. So how is it that I'm going to receive the blessing of a righteous spouse and children and serenity at home when I'm speaking to someone, I'm the one being ignorant, let alone, it's telling us not to speak or, to say salams or say peace or be in a peaceful state when someone is speaking to us, right, in an incorrect way. If I am lacking some aspects of character in my life where I'm losing my temper, I'm acting quote unquote a fool, or I'm acting foolishly because someone is acting foolishly with me. I'm not reminding myself of the hellfire. I am dealing with issues of zina, and it doesn't have to be the actual physical sin. What leads up to that? All of these things that Allah is telling us to avoid and do. How is it that I'm going to receive that blessing if I don't check myself with the other verses beforehand? The point being is the intent is seeking ways to bring out as much barakah and benefit from verses or hadith in order for one, first and foremost, to check themselves or better themselves, and then being able to make it possibly uh, what I'm looking for is relevant to the people you're speaking to. So this, as you go throughout your journey, brothers, and sisters, is right now where you are. You want to make sure that you start to discipline yourself to check your niyyah. There's going to be a time, especially if people are listening to us and constant praise, where, and Allah knows best, but it happens to many of us either through youth, inexperience, or just not being used to being talked to that way, where we enjoy that type of um, influence or that type of notoriety or um, whatever word you want to use. So then it's going to take some time to really look back at and say, man, how did I get here? Where I feel that, you know, I don't need to be, I don't need to check my niyyah. And I'll give a quick example about, for example, when you deal with community, coming from the Imam point of view. One thing about being a community educator and leader, even from like a seminary standpoint, let alone when you're talking about a community, one thing that a teacher wants to do is protect their students or their community. Or if you want to say safeguard the environment. One of the things that one has to check themselves is, am I the only one who can do that? Because when you find purpose in giving back to the community, and let's say you're doing a good job, it's effective. There's some good coming out of it. And one of the reasons why it's being done is because it's a need in the community. One of the things that we've seen from people who are older than us is letting go. I remember Imam Siraj told us, me and the team of Islam in Spanish a while back, always be aware that as you get older, it's harder to let go of what you, quote unquote, started. How do you let go? And that is having the trust in Allah that someone else can do it maybe better than you. And is my intent to keep this, or is it to, inshallah, serve again my Lord so I can get ajr? So it depends where you may fall into in the future as an instructor or maybe a doctor or an imam or whatever, wherever you fall into. Um, this journey where one has to look at themselves constantly and remind themselves that, okay, what am I doing this for? So that I'm the protector, right? I'm mama bear kind of thing, or I'm the overseer, and taking a step back. And I'll be honest, something that helped me in being the center being closed for 1 year. I'm just being frank with everyone, is that it opened my eyes to that. How I and the team really have been talking about letting go. Yeah, we set up the environment as best as we can, but what we've seen is that sometimes we feel that we're the gatekeepers, and you don't. And it's hard to say. You have to admit to it, like, man, like I really got to check myself and not, be always so overprotective. I have 6 daughters, right? So I was always, and 2 sisters, and my mother and my grandmother and my wife, right? So I always had this thing of wanting to protect, and then when you come into the convert community, you're protecting. But again, it's Allah who protects. You're just there to try to do your best to just give some advice and assist as best as possible. So one has to check their niyyah and making sure that they don't feel that they're doing something that in reality it's Allah who's taking care of the environment or the situation at hand. Sorry if I was too long-winded with the answer.
Exactly, that was very detailed and very helpful.
Appreciate it. Anyone else? It's 11:30. It's like, anything. It doesn't always doesn't also doesn't have to be about this specific subject matter, or you guys are questioned out. I don't know.
Very helpful to have this class about intention as we started our journey.
Mashallah. I appreciate it. Oh yeah. Real quickly, can in if Sister Sophia doesn't mind me asking, uh, I mean, it doesn't, not like I'm asking for everyone to answer, but if one or two people may, if they don't mind answering, like, what was the one of the reasons why you're dedicating 10 months of your life to this?
Personally, I just feel like, yes, I like to learn, but I want to learn the right things and go about it the right way. So I feel like given this type of, I want to say riskiness because sometimes it's a long time. So you have to be disciplined to see what you're spending. But being a good discipline is definitely keeping me mindful of my intention is where I expect to go.
Nice. For sister, yeah, the brother has to answer. Sorry, sorry, actually, yes. If you don't mind, if you don't mind.
Of course. So you mentioned that we need this knowledge and learning before anyone we might teach it to, anyone we might like pass it forward to any community, teach it or anything of the sort. Um, and I mean that's kind of the reason I joined. I don't have any intention to go teach some kids or something. Like I mean, obviously, if someone asks me for some advice, I'm like, hey, I learned about this.
Mashallah.
That's different. But really, it's just like I feel like in the today, things are just like so weird. Things are just so weird, and you have so much like polarization in anything possible,
Mm.
and so Islam gives us that balance. But if you don't know it, then you don't have it. Um, and so like obviously you can be Muslim and all, but I want to learn about the balance so I can actually live in it.
Oh, good. Mashallah, mashallah.
I have something to say side on.
Yes, please.
I joined because I grew I don't have the connection with Allah because I was taught, like, I'm from a Pakistani family, and always that Allah is fear. Allah, is going to punish you, is going to punish you for everything. So I feel like I wanted to go to a place where I could just start all over and relearn, the proper way. Who is Allah? What is His mercy? Besides being that He's just going to punish me for everything that I do. So I just want to, like, almost like I put the intention like a convert versus Islam all from the beginning. But I would like to start from the beginning and learn formally exactly, what Allah actually is saying instead of just from hearsay and culture stuff.
No, I really appreciate that, and just want to say that uh, from a convert perspective, uh, even if it's um, just as community members, and I'm not saying you won't benefit sisters or youth or anyone else. Um, one thing that many of us benefited from wasn't people that were in the beginning, especially weren't people from our background. It was brothers and sisters like yourselves who were there um, for people who are in a very vulnerable state in their life, and just something small that you may feel that it was something easy that you understood. It wasn't that complicated in your studies. When you teach someone, especially they're new to Islam, it it's like a life changing experience. So if you guys ever come across uh, a situation or an opportunity to assist uh, those group of people, you never know how they may have a profound effect on, by Allah's permission, of course, with their family that are not even Muslim. And I'm saying that because uh, when I think about, again, most of my teachers or not from my background, uh, one thing that was always nice to be reminded of was in them I see my future, meaning that somebody in your family became Muslim, right? Many, for some of you, many centuries ago, but someone had to do it. It started somewhere, and by their du'a and by their, you know, by the mercy of Allah, of course, 10, 15 generations now later, you guys are here learning Islam. The hope is for us to do the same for our families. That 10, 15 generations down, they're sitting here learning about the deen. And it starts off with people who dedicated themselves many times just to learn something about our faith. And again, it could be just something really small that has, again, a profound effect on others. So in this day where you not only can have influence people locally, even things online. Um, yeah, just wanted to mention that point. If you guys are ever out there in the future, even if it's just sitting in the masjid and you see someone come into the masjid for the first time, or they want to learn how to pray, that can be also the check-in of the intention, right? Like, I want to. It may be specific. I want to help youth, or I want to help this group or that group. Um, it goes a long way in establishing a healthy environment in the community. I always look at it as unique as uh, myself and Imam Abdullah Duro from Dallas, thinking about some of the people that we taught, that then they end up teaching our children. Right? I always felt that to be very unique. It's like, oh man, I remember when you know Sophia made me feel a little old, but I'm a grandfather, so it's all good, you know. But it's like, man, you think about the people that you had um, maybe had some influence or something, right? That was of some good, inshallah, that they're the ones now teaching, your children or future grandchildren. So and it was just a reflection on my end.
when you guys open Islamic Center again? Did I miss that?
Oh. So the first or the reopening will be the first Juma will be September 6th. So
Oh my
two,
God.
so 2 weeks from today, and then we're opening up slowly, right? We're in the sense of not going full force because we had thought that it was just going to be from we closed up in May of 2023, and the construction team told us August of that same year, like a couple months later. And yeah, so it took over. Uh, yeah, I mean, dang, I'm thinking about it. We had to wait another 8 months. Uh, so it's been a year and something, 5 months or so, or 3 months that we've been closed. So it's kind of like rebooting everything. So it'll be mostly the Juma khutbas, the starting with the classes in Spanish. Um, so usually do two khutbas, one in Spanish, one in English, and then again we have a lot of stuff online, and it'll slowly open. And make dua for us also in Dallas. The team there is seeming to be ready to. We only have an outreach center out there slash dawah center, so now it looks like the team seems to be prepared to open up their own masjid, inshallah. So keep us in your duas.
What she said about your question, if you guys are done.
Yeah, please, please, please.
So my journey to Islam is pretty much like it's on intention that being from Pakistan, only knowing the limited view of Islam, my view was also pretty much similar to okay, like when to punish you or like when to worry you, but you don't really know who God is.
Mm.
You were never really taught the right way. So my journey is also like very roller coaster. Um, I don't want to say too much, but I consider myself a resource as well because growing up, I never really paid much attention to my religion. I thought
Mm.
it was being forced down on me. And in my 20s, I pretty much was very secular.
Mm.
And stuff like last year, I abandoned my religion altogether.
Mm.
Um, I was at a very, I would say, spiritual rock bottom at the time.
Mm.
Like, like she said, like, well, left him to punish him, and how is Allah just? Like, he lets so many things happen, and maybe there are many different gods out there that I don't know. So it was a very rough journey for me, but alhamdulillah, what guided me back.
Alhamdulillah.
And I read a little bit Quran, but and then I'm like, how do I know it's the truth? Or maybe I need to create other religions, and maybe they are truth. And I'm like, you know what? It's too much out there. Maybe I'm only going to give chance to another one religion, which is Christianity, because that's the religion of America. You know, like
Mm.
for
Yeah.
so I even read a little bit of Bible in Genesis. There were a few stories that I was very much familiar with, and as I read it, just inherently I denied it. Like this is not true. If I'm trying to like I'm trying if I'm leading Islam, I need to find something which is better than Islam.
Mm.
So there are a few stories that many of us are familiar with that are in the Bible. One story which was kind of stuck out to me was Prophet Abraham, how he was just walking around and he saw God
Mm.
walking on earth, and I'm like, that can never be. Like God doesn't need to come on earth. So me having no Islamic knowledge or background, just limited version of it, I inherently denied the whole story. I mean, that is a fictitious story in the Bible. That is fictitious Abraham, and God never came on earth. The
Mm.
other story was about Prophet Lot, but I'm sure you would know, but I'm not sure other Muslims here would know it, that he, when he abandoned the city, not abandoned, when the cities were destroyed, the Sodom and Gomorrah,
Right.
they went into the cave, and you know the story of the two daughters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, even as a secular, quote unquote, secular Muslim, I know prophets when they come, they are a role model for their community and their nation. And deep down, I kind of knew that he was the prophet, of course, but reading the story of Bible, it really opened up my eyes and it shook me to a point that if I'm reading the story, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I had ants crawl all over me. I couldn't continue reading the story. I had to just started open and stop laughing because um, if you guys, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to mention that story.
I mean, yeah, I mean,
It's in
yeah,
the
yeah,
Bible. It's
it's
in the
yeah,
Bible.
yeah, yeah.
The story goes, eight prophets, but they don't consider Lot to be a prophet.
Yeah.
Eight prophets, Lot was told to go seek refuge in the cave. He went there with two daughters. And the daughter said, since everybody has been destroyed now, well, we need to keep our lineage. So one daughter told one, the other daughter, the older one told the younger one, we have to keep this lineage, so why not we give wine to our father? He's talking about blood.
Right.
I'll sleep with him, and the next night you sleep with him.
Right.
That's the Parada. So that really shook me, and I couldn't read that Bible anymore. I'm like, that is not my book. I don't want to associate with that.
Mm.
So not knowing a lot about Islam, I was going back and forth reading. I would just open up Quran anywhere and read it because I don't want to study Bible anymore or read it, anything about it. But as I read Quran, I had read this Surah Al-Hijr a few times, but it didn't connect with me. In there, Allah has quoted these stories miraculously.
Oh.
And Allah says in the Quran that Prophet Abraham was there and angels came to him, not God.
Mm.
And those daughters of Lot, like Prophet Musa Islam, they were not his own daughters, they were daughters of the community. And that story, of course, never happened. There are lots of fabrication. So I was very confused, and I'm like, you know what? I do believe that Quran is the truth, but how do I interpret it? Do I learn my religion like Granite said in her video? Whom I watched the video. How do you learn the true religion and what's wrong and what's right? There's so much. This society is saturated with information.
Yeah.
So how do you know which one is the right and which one is the wrong information? So I'm very happy that Sober Institute here did the full-time seminary, and how I find out about them is in the Ramadan. And once I know that they are reputable resource that I can come here and learn, I did istikhara.
MashaAllah.
And for actually, after I converted back to Islam, I did my shahada. I didn't know what else to ask God. For 6 months or maybe 8 months, I considered that period to be my trial period,
Mm.
probation, and I was in a probationary period.
Right, right.
All I asked God was, Inshallah, I had no knowledge because I was so straight. I had no wisdom. I had no that's why I was following the wrong methodologies and wrong teachings and wrong concepts. So please give me the knowledge, give me the wisdom, and give me the intellect. That's all that I asked for the past not past, but first 6 to 8 months of my conversion back to Islam.
Mm.
And alhamdulillah, in that time, I hear about Soba, and I'm here now.
MashaAllah. May
So
Allah
now,
MashaAllah.
Sheikh Abdullah says, learn this knowledge for yourself, and this other Sheikh and a couple other ones, they say, learn it so you can teach others. So me and my sister, we kind of discuss these things, like how do you balance these intentions? Am I learning it to teach others, or am I learning it for myself? But first and foremost, I'm here to learn my deen from the right resources. And then I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Sure.
I may teach, I may not teach, but first and foremost, I want to know who God is. I want to know what my relationship with Him is, and how can I implement that in my life. And then whatever He wants me to do after that, I'll be happy. You know, like my will is God's will is my will. So I'm not sure how to say that. You know, to say, I'm happy. His desire is my desire. Yeah, something like that. So, I'm very
MashaAllah.
happy to be here, and thank you so much. It was very beneficial.
No, man.
And,
I really appreciate you opening up this way because number one, uh, when I first became Muslim many years ago, we weren't. It wasn't so acceptable for a person to speak about doubting, having these doubts about Islam. it was like well, how could you even doubt it, kind of thing. Uh, and and to a certain degree, this aspect of secularism, I don't know what I'm saying, secularism is wasn't so profound in our community uh, as it is now. And I remember back in 2009 when I came back to Medina, I had actually it was myself and Sheikh Abdullah Duro from Dallas. We gave back-to-back khutbas at Masjid Mariam, and this young Pakistani brother came up to us and he said, "I want to take my shahada." I was like, "What do you mean? What's your name?" And I forgot the brother's name. I obviously had a Muslim name. I'm like, "What do you mean you want to take your shahada?" He was like, similar, like grew up, didn't know anything about Islam or very little, and only came to Juma because of his parents wanted him to go. So he would just go and say, "Yeah, I'm Muslim," so they wouldn't say anything to me. But he said, for the past X amount of years, I've been an atheist. And he said, but now he went to a class that previous evening, and something, mashallah, he was reading, and I remember being outside Masjid Mariam with the Sheikh and giving this, you know, young Pakistani brother, Pakistani American, his shahada. And at first we thought it was like some outlier type of situation, but what I started to see dealing with the community for the past 15 years is that we will get a lot of, as much as we are a very convert Latino based, uh, community slash educational, center. We do have a lot of born Muslims who come to us who feel comfortable talking about these matters. And I remember I was speaking to one young Bengali woman who became Christian, and her family was like, call her back to Islam. So I was like, while I was sitting with her, she started talking about Jesus and how much she loved. She became a Christian, and I don't even know if she ever left Islam. Like the way that she was speaking and explained her situation, it's like she never believed, and found some friends in college, and became Christian. Point being is, as she was talking about Isa alayhi salatu salam, I was telling her, that's what I love about him too. And then I started talking about the Prophet sallallahu. I remember her saying, I'll never forget it. She said, "It's like they're both in the same." I was like, "Man, you never." So I said, "You never really heard anything about the Prophet sallallahu?" She said, "Just uh, pretty much, shows how to, like how he prayed, how he went to Hajj, some, some other stuff, but never like any real deep connection, right, with who he was. She didn't know anything about his adab, right, his character, his akhlaq." And anyways, the point being is that even though from up to the what I know, she never came back, or she stayed Christian. I started to observe that around the community. I'm not talking about just Houston, but around the country, on how many, born Muslims are going through this journey. And one way that you can look at, yes, you're trying, we can't give what we don't have. So the more that we're able to gain knowledge of and, reflect upon it, of course, the fruit of knowledge is action. If we're ever given the opportunity to teach someone, it may not always be a classroom setting. Sometimes it may just be sitting with someone and letting another person know that you're not alone, right? That yeah, many times people many born Muslims who go through this journey feel that no one is there for them. Like no one has gone through it but me, uh, or are shy to talk about it. So even though nobody wants to see that person go through that, sometimes I mean, from the wisdom and hikmah of Allah, one goes through that journey, uh, possibly to appreciate what they have with Islam, and then you never know who you may connect with to be able to assist those people going through that, that struggle as well. because it's not, unfortunately, it's not decreasing, right? It's just more and more and more people becoming Muslim, um, born Muslims, especially, but even some converts who'll go into Islam and then they get hit up with all of this. It's a saturation of information, and then you don't know what is truth anymore. And that's why it's so important. I know you guys are doing this to, get a strong foundation, uh, and uh, and be ready to be tested. It's not nothing wrong with that, because what it does is it really keeps you grounded in learning and knowing. And part of it is knowing that there's an answer to it in uh, whatever these questions come about or scenarios come about. Allah Subhanahu wa Taala promised to preserve this Deen, and He has preserved it in so many different ways that there are subject matters that I was amazed that some scholar in, I don't know uh, if you have ever sat with Sheikh Joe Bradford. I know he's taught some classes here, or of course, in Houston. But I remember we're sitting in his library, and somebody called from America about some issue that was very uh, uh, that's something that constantly happening in the West, uh, and you know, I remember he pulled out a book from like the 1700s from the Maliki Madhab. That's from in the scenario happened in what is known as Algeria now, on how certain things were going on in that community, in that environment, that the scholar spoke about how to handle the situation and connected to what the scenario that was happening here in the States. And I was like, SubhanAllah, this deen is preserved. Like, how unique that the subject matter can be brought out from a book that was written, like I said, 400 years ago, and the scenario was taking place in West Africa, right? Like, you see the beauty of the deen, that Allah preserves it in so many different ways, that just be thankful to Allah that we have uh, this this way of life. And so don't ever. That's what my point is, that there's always an answer to these hard questions. And Shaitan doesn't sleep, as Sufyan al-Thawri said, or Hassan al-Basri said. So he's constantly trying to throw out, doubts. So the more that we're grounded, inshallah, by the tawfiq, and help of Allah, uh, we'll be able to deal with all kinds of scenarios. And Allah knows best.
See, I have a question that's not related to this. I have a friend, she's my children's nanny, and she's really interested in Islam, but she speaks Spanish, and I don't know how to start by giving her any kind of dawah. I sent her, like, general Spanish videos in Islam. But do you have any recommendations for just generally, how do you approach somebody when you're trying to, give them just some information about Islam that you don't want to scare them away?
Now, I appreciate that question. I will start off with Bismillah. I will start off with don't put a barrier that may not exist. Meaning, you mentioned scaring someone away or offending someone or any other scenario. That goes back to the intention. I want to invite or inform my friend about Islam. So you start with clarity what your intention is. And now, of course, there's relevancy, right? There's, okay, how am I going to speak to this person? And again, depending on your friend more than obviously I do. Uh, but many times, uh, and again, yeah, it may happen where a person might uh, be shocked of you bringing up God if you've never really brought it up before. But let's just say, right, you go with the intention of wanting to tell her something about Islam. Uh, Sometimes it might be just like any other person you just kicking with, you chilling, whatever you're doing, hanging out, and uh, and just ask like something simple as uh, let's say this in this situation you never really told her anything about Islam. So I'm just curious to know, from what you've heard and what you've learned, uh, what do you know about Islam? And so many times when people have done that, you'll be shocked, right, about that person saying that they started reading something about Islam. There's some cousin, right, who's on the other side of the states, is Muslim, or something comes up, right? Many times that happens. So you're sitting there thinking, or we might be sitting there thinking that they don't know anything about Islam, and they don't want to hear anything about Islam, but they already started that journey. And then there's other people who if they don't know, you just ask the permissions. Like, you don't mind if let you just either hear me out if you want to talk to her about it, or talk to them about it, or send you something, and just not and be real, like not to weird you out. It's just something that I believe that has had a positive effect on me, and I would just like to pass that on to you. And you never know. Let's just say you send them information after that. If the relationship stays the same or not, you can only control what you could control, but you do not know the information that was given to that person, how it will affect them. Subhanallah, a couple of years ago when we were in the center, the original center, uh, a lady came into the masjid, and she talked to a few people there that she was ready to take her shahada. And so we usually ask people, what led you to this point. Excuse me. And she said there was an older gentleman who 5, 6 years ago at the fiesta somewhere was drinking coffee, had a Spanish translation of the Quran, and gave it to me. And I took it because he was older than me, the respect of the elders, something still works in our culture. Alhamdulillah. She took it and she put it up. She didn't read it until about a couple of months before she came to the masjid. And we asked her, like, can you describe him? And when she was describing him, we were like, that's Abu Mujahid. And alhamdulillah, he was in the masjid, but in another room. And we asked him to come out, and she said that was you. Like, she pointed at him. You're the one who gave me the Quran. And he sat there and gave someone Quran, not knowing how that was going to take place after that. And 6 years later or something like that, she took her shahada. So a lot of times it happens that way, where you'll talk to someone's like, yeah, my friend gave me something, or I knew some Muslims, my neighbor, this or that. But it may not happen right then and there, right? It may happen later on, and you may not even be part of that process. They're like, yeah, I don't know if that person even's alive anymore. What I mean? Like, there's no connection anymore with that person. But Allah will, inshallah, reward uh, first of all the intention, and also any action that was taken after that. And Allah knows best. Why? Are you guys from Houston originally? Who's no? Are you from where originally? Philly? Jersey. Okay. What part of Jersey? And so you from what? West Philly? North? West Philly. Mashallah.
I'm from California.
Southern California or Northern or Central?
Northern Sacramento.
Nice. Philadelphia.
And what about you? Where are you from? We never heard about this before.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
no, it's
Where are
okay.
you in Soba?
My parents are from El Salvador, in Central America. I was born in Long Island, New York. Came down here and started in middle school, and lived in Alief. For those who don't know, it's an area in Southwest Houston. And from 12 to 19 uh, years old, I had met. Actually, the first person who ever told me about Islam was a 14-year-old kid from Philly.
What? 14?
14-year-old. I was 12. My friend was 14, a Mexican American brother. I remember he came to us one time. We're living in apartments, and he's like, "Yeah, I became Muslim." I'm like, "What?" Like we were just, I didn't understand what he was talking about. And I remember we were playing basketball, and I think about it now, it was around Asr time. He said he would have to go pray. And, we, all his friends, all of us would be, making fun of him, right? Who's going to go pray? Like, who prays in the, morning? I mean, if you're Christian, right, you'll pray in the morning, you pray at night. That's like maximum, right? Who prays in the afternoon? Like, so, so he started getting a little bit agitated with us making fun of him, and I get it. And he was like, "Why don't you, hear about Islam?" And so the Wendy's still exists to this day on Westheimer and Wilcrest. Went there, I'll never forget it. And he just sat there and told me that Jesus wasn't the Son of God and Allah, is God. And I was like, no way. And I had, no, Jesus, Son of God, come on. Right. But mashallah, man, he was very, very polite. I mean, when I think about talking to him, he was way more mature than I was. I mean, he was just like, like and I got a lot of friends from Philly. He had the Philly confidence, right? Yeah, look, you know what I mean? He's just talking like, yeah, I know my thing. And I'm like, whatever. When later on, uh, one of my Dominican friends in New York, I used to go in the summers, he told me to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that was when I read that autobiography, at 14, I knew Islam was the truth, but I wasn't ready to accept it because I thought you had to be like Malcolm X to become Muslim. Seriously, I was like not ready for that kind of lifestyle. And alhamdulillah, went through some things in life, and then at 19, there was a young Afghani brother who he was an atheist for most of his life, and Allah guided him. So I don't want to, it's almost 12. So I don't want to long it, I'm sorry, take anyone's time, but it was very unique how he came back to Islam was, he was working at his apprenticeship, fixing computers at the time, PCs. And in his department was some young Saudi guys. And they heard his name was Amanullah. So they're like, "Hey, you want to come pray?" And he would just tell them no. And they wouldn't say anything to him like, "Come pray." And I was okay. All right. And they would just go pray. And he said, "Man, they would ask me every day for like a month, come pray, come pray." And one day he kind of felt shy. He said, "All right, I'll go pray." But he said he forgot how to make wudu. And the guys were really cool with him, showing him how to make wudu. He made wudu and he prayed. And then started praying some more. And then he reconnected with some other young brothers his age that started practicing Deen. And so, long story short, he came into the store that I was working in, and uh, my birth name was Christian, and so he started off with that. It's like, "Oh, your name was Christian." He goes, "So what religion are you?" And subhanallah, Allah guides people. I knew Christianity wasn't the truth, and I thought that he was a Christian. I thought he wanted to preach to me Christianity, and I told him out of nowhere, I just said it. I want to be a Muslim, and he threw him off. He was like, "What?" He was just like, "What? I'm Muslim," I'm like, "All right." And then the other one thing I liked about him, still to this day, alhamdulillah, but what I really enjoyed at that time was he would just come to see how I was doing, but never preaching to me. And then couple of months later, took me to a few masajid, and he took me to those who may know Madrasa Islamia. He took me there, and there was like 200 people from Indonesia. They had a big ijtima gathering. So all these guys with turbans, with the cool. I don't know what that was, but it looked like eyeliner, right? And in my point of view, and I'm coming in with my bag, like '90s gear, like baggy pants, my earring, like looking straight thuggish, and I remember one guy, I had a problem with him for a couple of years. He didn't. He was like, "Why is he in the masjid? Get him out the masjid." It was me and my homeboy, and he was telling he didn't want us in the masjid. And I remember, and I asked, mom, I'm like, "Yo, why is he?" He goes, "He just don't want you here. You don't think you belong here." And I remember after I took so I took my shahada, and then I remember seeing that brother, and it took me a while to like let it go. Uh, he apologized. He was an older gentleman, but anyways, that was those days. Huh? Nah, nah, he wasn't Pakistan. He was alhamdulillah. He was my brother. He's my brother. He's my uncle. So my alhamdulillah. Then after that, got to meet people from different you know like I said, some people who are who are instructors here. I think more for the weekend programs. Like the first person who ever taught me anything dealing with Allah was Joe Bradford. He taught us the three fundamentals, three questions in the grave. And only got at a young age. I was 20, my convert wife, and then uh, Allah blessed us with 8 children, 6 daughters, 2 sons, one grandson, and Jibril, and more grandsons on the way. So now the balance is coming. Right? So all these women, mashallah, and it's all good. I love my daughters, but for the girls, they're loving the boys coming in the house. So, and then my sister became Muslim in 2010, and my dad in October will be 1 year, 79. Yeah. And my sister married a Pakistan. Sorry, I know you come out together. I was just saying, and just to the South Asian connection here, my sister married a South Asian brother, and so have that nice mix, journey. Sorry, I see her getting. Why, yes.
I don't think there could have been a better first Tazkiyyah class. I needed all of that, so Jazakumullah khairan.
Oh, yeah.
One of the reasons we bring our local students here is so that you can benefit from them inside the classroom and outside the classroom. After September 6th, you know where to find Sheikh Isa. He is an amazing marker of mentorship and fellowship in this community that I hope that we continue to benefit from. So we hope to have you back, inshallah, again.
Inshallah.
And I hope you see these students coming out to Islam and Spanish to benefit, to volunteer, to help, like you said, jumpstart everything that's going on there.
Inshallah.
Jazakumullah
Yeah.
khairan. You guys are welcome to stick around for a little bit. Sheikh Isa you're welcome to take questions. I have some I just want to say for now. And we have a little gift for you.
Oh, subhanallah. Gracias.
Something to
To remind me.
to remind you.
Mashallah. Mashallah. Yeah.
There's a few things in there as well.
Thank you.
And
Love that.
that's it for our first week. That's a wrap, and we'll see you guys inshallah on Monday. Yeah, they'll take care
Okay.
of it. Yes. I do have to leave.
Go
I
ahead.
have a meeting at 12.
No. Do you think?
Be late for now.
No. Sorry.
But no, I wanted to make sure that I said salam on your way out. And thank you so much.
Islam to the family.